The working class is confronted with attacks on its livelihood. Over 30 million working class people live in poverty, with 27% of working class children malnourished. Unemployment has reached catastrophic levels, with 12.3 million people looking for but unable to find work. 70% of our youth aged between 15 and 24 are not in employment, education, and training, unemployed. The working class communities are ravaged by crime and gender-based violence. Working class children learn in overcrowded and understaffed schools and cannot read for comprehension. 84% of the working class people rely on a neglected, understaffed public health care. Let me repeat that. The 84% of the working class people rely on neglected, underfunded, and understaffed public health care system. The demand for public, safe, and affordable transport has been reversed, with most workers now using private transport to work. When the heroic struggles of the working class defeated the apartheid dreams of a better life after centuries of oppression, poverty, and humiliation seemed within reach. But that dream soon became a nightmare when the ANC-led government adopted GIE in 1996, inaugurating the South African version of the IMF World Bank's structural adjustment programs. Since then, the working class has been on the defensive, and the capitalist class, aided and abetted by successive ANC-led governments, has been on the attack. A coordinated attack, the austerity and erosion of the social wage. The attacks on the living conditions of the working class take multiple forms. These include, but are not limited to, the underfunding of public services and privatization of the state-owned entities that are supposed to power development. Consistent with neoliberal dogma, the ANC-led government has successfully committed to budget cuts in crucial areas such as the health and education. These cuts have had devastating and worsening consequences on the quality of life of the working class. A recent example was the startling announcement from the Western Cape provincial government that it will effectively lay off over 2,400 teachers whose contracts are due to end on the 31st of December 2024. Other provinces have not been spared the wrath of the National Treasury's budget cuts. The KwaZulu-Natal province has a budget shortfall of 4 billion and is on course to lay off 11,092 teachers. Gauteng province, Mpumalanga and the Northwest provinces, and the Northern Cape are all facing similar fates. Public health care provision faces similar problems. Across the country, there is a shortage of healthcare professionals and personnel in the public facilities. Vacant posts on health professionals are left unfilled, leaving the public healthcare system unable to adequately deliver quality healthcare to the overwhelming majority of the working class. For instance, the Free State has a 22% vacancy rate for doctors, followed by Mpumalanga at 18.5% and Limpopo province at 17.6%. Workers are being made the scapegoats for low economic growth. The mainstream commentators, including capitalist parties like the Democratic Alliance, clearly state that unions and the cost of labor are to blame for the economy's sluggish growth. Daily, we are told by the ideologues of the capitalist class that the profit motive fuels valuable innovation and that the best way to organize society is through the free market. These free market fundamentalists argue that were it not for the inflexible and stringent labor laws, business would invest, jobs will be created, hunger and poverty will be banished, and a scene will be set for prosperity to reign. For the DA and others, workers must be allowed to auction themselves to the lowest bidder to ensure their prosperity. They fault the minimum wage laws and worker protections for rising unemployment. They claim that unions undermine employment by insisting on workers receive a living wage that is a wage that is not enough for workers to live on. Unfortunately, the lives of the black working class mean very little to these fundamentalists. It is from this perspective that the proposed labor amendments or the labor law amendments must be understood. Let me repeat. It is from this perspective that the proposed labor amendments must be understood. The aim is to disarm the bargaining power of labor, making it easy for employers to hire and fire workers at will. Put differently, the proposed labor amendments are not merely technical legal proposals for precision or efficiency. These laws reflect the brazen class warfare waged by the capitalist class and a government that is doing its bidding. The proposed amendments. The government and organized business have, through NEDLEC, proposed amendments to the labor laws. These proposals attempt to give effect to what has long been suggested to remedy the low growth South African economy, that the South African labor regime needs to be reformed, they argue. The proposed amendments are not politically or ideologically neutral, but serve the interest of the capitalist class. When Saftu joined NEDLEC, a cooperative structure that could capture even the most militant union movement, it vowed that it will introduce a new culture of accountability for its leadership and report back and mandate taking from the membership. We believe that the time has now come to inform our members and the broader working class that there are pointed attacks aimed at reversing workers' gains since the dawn of democracy. Below are some of the most vicious attacks on the hard-won gains of the working class. 1, no need for formal hearing. Presently, before a worker can be dismissed, they must be charged and called to a disciplinary hearing. With the proposed changes, employers are not obliged to convene a formal disciplinary hearing before disciplining or dismissing a worker. The employer can merely request the worker provide written reasons why they should not be dismissed. If the worker does not provide written reason, the worker can be dismissed without the employer convening a disciplinary hearing. 2, no rights for new and young workers about dismissals. For the first 6 months, younger workers will not have any same protections as other workers against unfair dismissals, except when it is deemed an automatic unfair dismissal. This means that employers and government want an unrestricted right to dismiss newly employed workers without following a due process during the first 6 months of employment. They want to hire and fire workers below the age of 30 at will. 3, unfair labor practices are to be limited. If this proposal amendment becomes law, workers and the unions can no longer refer unfair labor practices disputes concerning promotion, demotion, employee training, and benefit provisions to the CCMA. Also, if an employer refuses to reinstate a worker in agreement, workers can no longer refer an unfair labor practice dispute to the CCMA. 4, the labor brokers and the short-term contracts. The employers and government are proposing to extend the period of labor brokering from 3 months to 6 months. In fact, the original demand of the bosses was for 12 months. In other words, employers want to extend the period beyond which labor brokers workers are deemed permanent clients of employees from 3 months to 6 months. With the proposed changes to the LRA, employers also want to be able to employ an employee on a fixed term contract of successive term contracts for longer than 6 months, or employment instead of 3 months. Let me repeat that. With the proposed changes to the LRA, employers also want to be able to employ an employee on a fixed term contract or successive fixed term contracts for longer than 6 months of employment instead of 3 months. In the landmark ruling of the Constitutional Court, it ruled that the workers employed by temporary employment services, commonly referred to as the labor brokers, under the Section 198A of the Labor Relations Act, must be deemed to be permanently employed after 3 months. The critical issue was that the interpretation of the so-called deeming provision, and we refer anyone to the NUMSA and others case in the Constitutional Court, and it is in the statement in terms of the number of that Constitutional Court decision, which was made in 2018. Point number 5, the attacks on the national minimum wage. To reduce the cost of labor, employers want to amend the national minimum wage figure to include all benefits a worker receives. Currently, the national minimum wage refers to a worker's hourly wage and does not include benefits and the cost of the employer's contributions to the UIF and the benefits, for example. Now the employers want to include these costs in an hourly wage mandated by the law. So you can see what they're angling to do. If they give workers some bag of milli or overall or whatever as a benefit, they want that included in the national minimum wage amount, and so that they can find a way of reducing the actual wage. Number 6, the attacks on the right to strike. The capitalists want to stop continuous use of a Section 77 strikes, as it is currently the case. Regarding Section 77 of the LRA, a union or federation of unions can call a socio-economic protest strike. The certificate for such a strike lasts indefinitely as long as their demands have not been met. Now the employers and government want the certificate to lapse if it is not used within 12 months. They are directly responding to the loss of this particular case they would have taken against Nedlec in the case which involved the COSATU strike about 2 years ago. The Unions Federation must then reapply according to the bosses or submit a new application even if they have ignored the demand that led to the first application in the first place. This is another way in which the working class power is undermined by these amendments in the boss's interest. Number 7, the threshold of determining high-paid employees in Section 193, 194, 208, and Schedule 7. The government proposed excluding high-paid employees from the dismissal protection, excluding automatic unfair dismissal. But generally, government, with the support of the bosses, wants to exclude the so-called high-paid employees from the unfair dismissal protections. The prescribed amount should begin with a threshold of 1 million rands. Just imagine the public sector workers in the municipalities, in the public sector itself, in the state-owned enterprises, as well as the rest of those that are in the junior management positions in the private sector. They want those workers that they should be basically excluded from the protections of unfair dismissals. Number 8, the following proposals from the labor laws from labor were rejected. Labor, which is Saftu, COSATU, FEDUSA, and NACTU, had demanded that Section 198A should be amended to extend the facilitation period from 60 to 120 days to ensure that retrenchment is undertaken as the last resort. Business and government rejected the proposal because the subsection provides for extension of facilitation period in appropriate circumstances. But the appropriate circumstances are not determined in law, but they are determined by whoever is the facilitator of that negotiations, and we reject that. 2, we had proposed that Section 41 of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act be amended to increase severance pay from 1 to 4 months. After much deliberation, the government and labor agreed to increase severance pay from 1 to 2 weeks, which is currently being rejected by business. And they claim that it is in the light of the current economic climate, which we know they can use that excuse perpetually forever. The labor law amendments are part of a broader, coordinated, and systematic attack on the working class. And we, as Saftu, will organize to defend our interest and the interest of the broader working class. We are already convening shop steward councils to brief this critical layer of our leadership so that our members are mobilized and better informed about these evil intentions, in particular from the employers. We shall announce the dates of the shop steward council meetings nationwide. We are preparing for a general strike, if needs be, to defend the workers' rights and their gains. End of the statement. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mobala. Now we are ready to take questions. Just note hands, and thereafter you will be noted to put your questions to the leadership of the Federation. Yes.
afternoon. Sorry, good morning. My name is Katla Rologodi from the SABC. I wanted to get an understanding of where matters are right now. Following those discussions at NADLAC and your proposals being rejected, does this then mean that the amendments have been given the green light? Would there be maybe an avenue of public participation whereby the workers would be roped into more or less give their take on these amendments and how they're going to affect them? Or from NADLAC, they were represented and then that's the be all and all? These amendments are as good as done. Thank you.
Yeah, since I do not see the other hand, oh, sure.
Thank you. I'm Hawalo Magolego from UFM. Is there consensus among the four federations that these proposals should be rejected, or is it just Saftu at this stage? And looking at your own strength, is Saftu in a position to strike in an impactful way that forces, in particular, business to the negotiating table? And just your comments generally on the GNU about, a little over 3 months in office. There seems to be, commentators believe that South Africans, and I think this includes your members, that they are generally happy and have a much more positive outlook about the future of the country. Just your comment on that.
The SABC question first. The report on these negotiations is available and we are willing to share with you as to where everything is. There's lots of information. We only picked up the most important and the most pointed attacks on us in the press statement. But there's a comprehensive report which I think it is only fair that we share it with yourself so that you can go through in your own time to look at where everything is, including the process of how the process moves forward now. The labor law task team process was set up by NADLAC itself. It's a subcommittee that must present its report to the executive structures of NADLAC. And here is the rules, which is what makes us to want to talk to workers now. These amendments are proposals. Support some of them, by some of them. Some of the proposals from government are mostly supported by business, and business goes even further to make its own demands. Some of the proposals of government are supported by labor and are totally rejected by business in most of the instances. Faced with that, government will say to the process that, look, we still the government, not NADLAC. NADLAC is a consultation process which allows participation by the core constituencies in the economy, the key constituencies in the economy. And when all it is done and dusted, the government will take this process forward and consultation would have taken place in NADLAC. Taking it forward means taking it within government processes and taking it into the parliamentary processes for amendments to be done, which means that there will still be an opportunity to make some representation in the process that Parliament may choose to have. But you know, the experience is that by the time the matter goes to the Parliament, with the current Parliament, and I'm going to come back to your question, you can scream as much as you can. Short of a massive statement by workers through a general strike, the amendments that government wants will go through the parliamentary process because Unfortunately, our parliamentarians tend to be praise singers of the executive. They never ever in a fundamental way reject what the executive is proposing in parliament. So that's the process in terms of how it is going to unfold. Now, in relation to the first question was, I'm sorry?
However,
There was a first question before.
The impact of Saftu.
Or the strength of Saftu.
Are the four
yes.
federations agreeing?
Yeah.
Alone, can we do have capacity?
The four federations are at one. They are agreeing on rejection of the amendments. Totally united. The disjuncture was that we would have preferred that this press conference be a joint press conference with the other four federations, and that the COSATU strike that they had on the 7th of October would have been on another day. That would have allowed us all to effectively mobilize the base so that we make a powerful statement. Unfortunately, our colleagues in COSATU rushed and, in our view, misfired. The 7th of October strike, even though we say it was a success, in our view, who have been organizing the strikes all of our lives, it was a damn squib. It didn't happen. It didn't make any statement that will threaten government or the employers not to proceed with the amendments or with the retrenchments or the austerity programs. It was a half-made statement. Our appeal to the Labour Federation still is, we need a joint statement in rejection, not just in neglect. We need a joint action in rejection of these amendments in the streets. And let's repeat what we normally always say. What we have not won in the streets, you will not win in the negotiating table. So our appeal to all of them, it is time to put egos on the side, to join forces, to mobilize the rest of the working class, in particular the young people, in rejection of these amendments. As to whether Saftu has a power on its own to force government to retreat and force employers to rethink the proposals that they are putting forward, we think we demonstrated that in the previous amendments in 2018. And I'm sure, sitting where you are, you have not seen anything close to those levels of demonstration in this economy. And we have capacity to pull the same numbers and to resist this attack. We insist that this can't be just a trade union matter. This is the battle of the working class. It is the working class that is coming under attack. And as you can see, we see this not just as an isolated attack based on the labor laws. In our view, this is an overall attack on the living standards of the working class, as we point out in the statements that we have read already. That's a response. Now, in terms of the Government of National Unity, we warned when the Government of National Unity was inaugurated that a government led by the ANC and the Democratic Alliance will constitute a doomsday for workers. These amendments are fitting perfectly within the expressions we made at the time. The ANC long shifted to the right, long shifted to serve the interest of the powerful in society, the capitalist class. That was the capitalist class won that victory as way back as in 1995, when the ANC announced its first program of privatization, followed by the introduction of GEAR in June of 1996, and then followed by all manner of other economic programs to try and appease the bosses. The ANC, now joined by the Democratic Alliance, spells a disaster for us, the working class and the marginalized poor majority, which is still the black population. So we're taking a pounding through austerity programs, and end of this month, the Minister of Finance will be announcing further austerity programs, which will cut the expenditure and make life even more difficult for the working class than it is now. These labor amendments must be seen within that, including the refusal to take meaningful steps to arrest the escalating food prices, to do something about the escalating fuel prices, to do very little except paying lip service to the escalating electricity prices. All of these things, we see them as one, not one and the other. They constitute what we call an attack on the living standards of the working class, with the hope that the business will then invest in the economy. And the record of the business is that notwithstanding everything, they have just refused to come to the party. They have just not invested in this economy. As you know, we have over and over again pointed out that we are sitting at around 25% spare capacity in the industrial policy level. We should be not deindustrializing. We should be increasing the levels of industrialization. Secondly, we have pointed out over and over that the bosses are sitting on a 1.4 trillion rands investable cash, which is in the back of their pockets. We have pointed out that the bosses have taken advantage of a loosened monetary policies to shift their primary listings to other countries all over the world, in the process robbing the economy of the resources we so desperately need to develop. We have pointed out that government is doing absolutely very little or nothing to arrest the phenomenon of illicit cash outflows that have now increased from between 300 to 400 billion rands to 1.8 trillion rands, according to the latest figures. So the government continuously goes back to the wall and say, please, we will take the more clothes in this dancing in front of capital, with the hope that they will eventually come to the party. It has not come to the party. The strategy as a whole is totally wrong. Comrade Sbey wanted to make some attention.
Yeah, I think the point is that, and I want to build on the question of Bawaleo, but I think you've partially covered that point. This is not going to be, or what you're looking for, is not a Saftu resistance, because these are by no means, attacks targeted at Saftu, but these are attacks on the entire working class, right? I think the amendments have been spoken about, but let's just take one when it comes to the issue of minimum wage. Already our minimum wage bears no relations whatsoever with the cost of living of many workers, including 60% of workers that are on or below that minimum wage, right? When we speak about the value of labor, and just to take this point, because we are talking about really here a colonial slavery where wages, are not about the cost of social production, but really they are linked with the colonial wage formation that laid the foundation for modern capitalism, continued under apartheid, 30 years in democracy. We haven't broken from that, right? I mean, just look at the cost of food, the household food basket. It's somewhere between 5,200 to 5,500, right? These workers are earning 4,000 to 5,000, 4,500 to 5,000 minimum wage. So they can't afford food. When we go to the cost of transport, we're speaking here about the fact that the overwhelming majority now have to rely on private transport. That is estimated to be 2,000 rand for a family of 4. That is a worker commuting to work on a daily basis. Of course, the students, to schools and so on, that are part of the working class families and so on. The cost of housing, not a housing, fancy housing in what called in Sandton, Rosebank and whatever the rich are staying. But we are talking about the most basic housing, including backyard rooms in Soweto, in Mamelodi, and all those things and so on. Ranges from 2,500 to 4,000. When you take an average residential property, they'll actually say that rental is at 7,900. But by that they mean decent flats, townhouses. We're not there. We're just talking about a backyard room in Soweto and townships. When you calculate that, 2,500 to 4,000 at the moment, I can go on and on, right? And that's the reason for us, as GIUSA, we are raising it with Saftu to say what becomes our demand for a living wage. There is a report we made submission to say 15,000 rand is what the researchers are saying is a livable wage, not a living wage, a livable wage, right? And there's a problem with that amount, but that's an issue. But there's also the issue of electricity tariffs that have been raised by ESCOM, which has increased, according to some estimate, as much as 800%, tariffs from 2007 to where we are. They are proposing over 36% next year and 11% following year and so on and so on. That is going to again raise the cost of electricity to astronomical levels. But lest we forget that electricity alongside, fuels, oil in particular, these are major input in a production process, but also major input in every other industry. So it's not just about the cost of transport, not just about the cost of electricity. It's also going to be about the cost of food and every service that we access, because this will again raise the cost of production, which in a monopolized economy like ours, we can always be sure that will be passed on the working class. The catastrophic levels of unemployment GS is written about. So my view is that Saftu will have to go all out to mobilizing young people whose lives are being wasted by this economic crisis of capitalism. Over 12 million of them who are unemployed, living in squalor and poverty. Millions of people in informal settlements facing a housing crisis for which not only there is no solution, but it's getting worse, but also workers in poverty wages. And I want to end on this note with your indulgence, that the issue of poverty wage is not just about our members living decent lives that they deserve, because these are the real creators of the wealth we have in the economy. And we make absolutely no apology on that as Marxists, right? But it's also about what kind of economy we want to build. But also it's about the issue of growth. I'm saying this because a lot of, narratives that pass for economic science suggest that our demand for better wages actually will destroy jobs. Now, firstly, when you talk decent minimum wages, like every legislation, there's always mechanisms, right, for exemptions where there is a case and a need that can be demonstrated. But the issue here is about vast industries that can perfectly afford, from food, securities, cleaning. Lots of these companies, by the way, that security companies and cleaners, are already charging government 20-something thousand and paying their security guard cleaners only about 5,000 people, right? So the money we are demanding, for the most part, is already paid and charged. It's just that it's not landing where it actually belongs with the workers. But it's also the fact that the poverty of the black working class is central to the deindustrialization of this country. The question here is not about availability of wealth. It's where is this wealth going in the economy? And when you look, for instance, just at the mining industry, let's accept for a second what the Mineral Council is saying. The volumes of production last year was 1.1 trillion. That is industrial turnover, the turnover of the entire industry. A year before, it was 1.2 trillion. Even if you just accept the primary sales, as in 2022, there were 81.7 billion, right? 55% of that, of the profits from that industry, were taken by a foreign-owned multinational companies like BHP Billiton and others that are paying their CEOs, in the case of BHP Billiton, 234 million rand. I think that's the figure that I've seen, which it will take a worker working or living 114 lives, each of them working 40 lives without interruption. A worker on a minimum wage, just to be able to earn what the CEO has earned. These are people who are subsidizing through cheap electricity, special tariffs for which I and you are paying, and all those things and so on. So it's not a question of there is no wealth. There is. The question is, does it leave this country through profit repatriation of the big, mainly foreign-owned multinational companies, or do you put this money in the working class who spend it locally and therefore generate economic activities in many rural areas, in many townships, where it will stimulate growth and create many more jobs? So we reject as Saftu the argument that better and decent wages are incompatible with economic growth. If anything, we argue the opposite.
Thank you very much.
In summary, GS.
Okay. Do you want to?
Just in summary, on the 100 days of the GNU, although the GS has already articulated, but in addition, we are saying GNU is all about to deepen the legacy that was left by apartheid and colonialism, taking into consideration that when ANC-led government took over power in 1994, instead of changing the microeconomic policies of the country, the ANC-led government implemented the same growth path of the apartheid regime, whereby they came into a point of practicalizing the neoliberal policies of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. So the GNU is all about to deepen those particular legacies, because when they took over in 1994, the ANC-led government, for an example, the manufacturing sector to the GDP in 1994 was 24%. But currently, as we speak, the manufacturing sector to the GDP is currently at 12%, if not below. That exercise on its own has led to massive high unemployment in the country, which is almost about 40%. So we are saying GNU is not all about to service the vast majority of the people, which is the working class and the poor. GNU is all about to divert from the actual policies of the ANC, because when they campaign, they claim to be the owners of the Freedom Charter. And the Freedom Charter, one of its provision number 3 says the mineral wealth beneath the soil, the monopoly industries, the banks, all of them shall be transferred to the total ownership of the people as a whole. But GNU is not speaking that particular language. So that's why we're saying GNU is all about to deepen the legacy that was left by apartheid and colonialism, which is poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, mine will be, let me just combine the two questions and maybe give clarity as to the question from Katleho and Khawelo. To say how far are the negotiations, the process, and maybe to say where to from here. as Saftu, maybe we need to give that direction that the National Executive of Saftu has mandated us to make sure that we go to all corners from Mosina to Cape Town, convening the shop steward councils. But as the GS has already indicated that at Nedlec, we have also formed a campaigns committee. In the campaigns committee, Saftu is saying, instead of having Saftu as the shop steward council alone, let's make sure that all the federations, they form part of those shop steward council, meaning that that's how we answer the question of are they all federations on board. That's what we want to do, because this is not the war of workers only. It is the war that we want also to engage the student formations. We want to engage civil society formations that are progressive. We'd like to engage women that are progressive formations, so that we know that when we have to respond, because the response should have an impact, it must be an impactful response, we make sure that we have mobilized all the ground. Because as I think, as you can see, when you read what we have given you, you can see that this is a reverse. And if it's a reverse, it will make the trade unionism irrelevant if we are going to accept that a dismissal should not even have a disciplinary hearing. We are just reversing the game. So that is why we are saying it will be important to ensure that we all move together, and when we move together, no one is left behind. So we will be convening those shop steward councils, and we are calling all shop stewards, no matter the logo you have, we are calling all shop stewards to be ready, to be on the look when we start to mobilize, so that they familiarize themselves with the changes that are happening at Nedlec, and they give us the mandate as to how should we respond to these changes that are happening at Nedlec, and they be ready to defend the gains of the workers.
Thanks, Comrade DGS. Yeah. Yeah, I'll take the last round of hands, and then we'll conclude the business of the day.
I think I'll be able to project it. It's fine. Yeah. It's from Newsroom Africa, and I think I've had this conversation with Mehmet yesterday as well. But just looking at some of the amendments, first of all, with the council, is there still room for the unions, government, and employers to still get on the same page on some of the amendments? And then government and employers saying that the reason for the amendments is to improve efficiency in the labor market. Are we looking a little bit deeper into some of the bottlenecks that do exist in the labor market? For example, if we take, that whole protection against retrenchment, or for the young ones that they don't need, any formal hearings about dismissals. The employers I've spoken to, most of that, they're crying around learnerships, that young people will be in these learnerships perpetually without them actually securing a job. Both their government and employers then spending quite a lot of money in those learnerships. So are we taking our discussions to maybe dig into sort of those issues within the labor market, and how we can then have more consensus as the different social partners with the issues such as that?
Katlego Logodi from the SABC again. I have two questions. The first one is on the amendments. National Treasury proposing refinements to the legislation, this being the Employment Incentive Scheme, and proposed refinements to this legislation. So these amendments would be including a punitive, specifically targeting employers who engage in abusive practices. The proposal set to come into effect on the 1st of March 2025. I'd like to hear and get a comment from your reaction to this legislation, the refinement and this proposal by National Treasury. The second question would be on the negotiations that are underway in the public sector. You know very well that government has proposed, or the employer has proposed 12%, and has proposed 3% as the workers you want 12%. Are you able to give us a sense of where you are right now, where those negotiations are concerned, especially when we've heard over time that really the cost of maintaining the public sector has been exorbitant over time? Let's reflect on really where you are right now. The government saying that if we are then to implement this 12%, it's something that won't be sustainable over time. According to you guys as the workers, what do you make of these proposals? This proposal by the government of 3%, and how do you see this featuring in the upcoming midterm budget policy statement?
Yeah, last one.
Yeah, it's a follow-up. You know, since the inception of the GNU, we have, you would have seen a wave of raids at workplace establishments, joint programs between labor and home affairs that have uncovered, among others, the employment of illegal immigrants, but general exploitation in the workplace. Are you able, as Saftu, to give a verdict of how government is faring in implementing the current legislation, the current labor policies, before you even get to the amendments to say Labor Relations Act, are employers following? Does the state have the capacity to do so? Because others have questioned these programs to say, why now, when these students were recruiting, at times even underage people that are here undocumented and paid next to nothing?
The first set of questions was, I thought that you were asking directly.
No, I had asked him. We had a small discussion. So it's just to hear your
different
view
view
as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Let go. There is always a possibility that the last minute deal can be struck by the parties. But look, this process has been going on for 2 years now. It started even before Saftu was admitted at NEDLEC. It's now nearing its end. There is now a final report of the Labour Law Reform Task Team that is ready for presentation for it to be adopted, which will have options, as I was saying earlier. It will say on this particular issue, government and employers agree, labor disagree. On this one, government and business agree, labor disagree, and so forth and so forth. That's where we are now. It is at the last moments and of negotiations, and that's why we cannot afford to keep quiet and not raise our voice at this particular stage before matters get concluded at NEDLEC and before matters get taken to the parliamentary processes. And that's why we're mobilizing now, such that by the time the matter go to parliament, workers are long in the streets and demanding that the amendments that assault their gains are not put forward to the parliamentary processes. Now, the bottlenecks the employers are referring to and how they want to seek to address those is what they are proposing. It is not true that the employers have any sympathy for any learnerships. If anything, they mean that they will rather sideline workers' gains and rights so that they can employ learnership or workers in learnerships perpetually as part of increasing their levels of profit making at the expense of human rights. So they have no time for learnerships. And if anything, the employers, as the last question from you is indicating, are using every trick in the book to sideline the general labor laws in our country across the board in a disparate attempt to make sure that they maintain and even increase the current levels of profits they're doing. And so they can't lie now and say they're bottlenecks. We end up having to use the learnerships. If anything, they are proposing, as you can see from the statement, they want no protection whatsoever for workers that will be in employment for the first 6 to 12 months in their employment. They want no hearings to be heard. And they want to remove any kind of protection to protect young workers in the economy. And that's what we are resisting. Now, I don't know if you want to make any addition to that question.
Yeah, maybe just to say this point that, I mean, in the final analysis, it is because we are in a stage or in a period of economic stagnation, which, if you like, doesn't work for anybody. From the point of view of the capitalist class, they have a crisis of profitability, and they think the way to address that crisis basically slashing the conditions of the workers to savage levels, really, which you can't describe as anything else than the colonial slavery I spoken about earlier on. At the same time, for the workers, for the working class, for the poor, life is becoming unbearable. So we are headed for a condition, or rather, for a collision of classes. And there's no any way out of the situation. It's a question really of whether you restructure the economy in the interest of majority, which we have proposed how you do that. You nationalize the minerals in this country, beneficiate and reindustrialize the economy, build or rather initiate a mass public works program to rebuild the public infrastructure, public services, in the course of that, creating millions of jobs, eliminating unemployment, reducing poverty and inequalities that are there, and so on. So these expectations, unfortunately, are irreconcilable. And I think what the business and government they've been doing is that they've been escalating, they've been stepping up what essentially is a one-sided class war that they are unleashing at the working class, they are unleashing at labor movement, and the restrictions on the right to strike and many other trade restrictions that we see more and more in workplaces is an attempt on the part of the capitalist class to tie the hands of an organized working class behind its back as they are preparing for an all-out onslaught in terms of unemployment that is a staggering 12.3 million, as we point out, in terms of privatization of electricity, which will take the tariffs to a new astronomical level, the cost of living crisis that is spiraling well beyond affordability of the basics for the working class and so on. So is that irreconcilable class conflict that I think is playing out at NETLEC? And we are here because no amount of negotiating is going to resolve the contradictions that have accumulated at NETLEC. And we believe that this GNU is a political conspiracy of the parties rejected by the overwhelming majority of the working class, parties that agree on nothing else except a neoliberal onslaught, parties that want to privatize everything, the ports, they want to do away with social grants, they want to reduce the minimum wage, they want to attack the rights workers fought for, won over decades of struggle, from the days of the struggle against apartheid to the entire post-1994. So is that conspiracy that obviously they entered into with a view to pushing this kind of reforms, and I don't think that there's going to be any amount of negotiating. It's a question of the struggle of the living forces, and I think it will have to be decided on the street. And from the point of view of COSATU, and I think the DGS was correct, our shop stewards are going to be the war councils of the working class. They are going to be open to every shop steward in this country, every worker who wants to take up a fight, who wants to work out a strategy, both to fight the immediate attacks, but also on all other issues. We are also going to be reconvening a working class summit to make sure that communities and other movements of the working class that are faced with this crisis, right, that is facing workers and so on, also are able to organize, to coordinate with us, so that we are really contemplating what should be a mother of all class battles in the working class. And I think this determined attack on the part of the bourgeois and the institutions, including government.
Katlego. Personally, I don't have the information on the first question about the Treasury's process of amendment that they may announce in terms of refining whatever. That issue is not in Netland, which is the problem in the first place. If it was in Netland, we would know about it. I've just checked our acting spokesperson if he's aware of any such a proposal. We're not aware, which is a problem, because the Treasury is known for wanting to avoid at all costs subjecting its proposals to Netland. It always wants to go outside and go directly in Parliament, where it can present its bills as non-amendable bills and to get them through the system. We will have to check that again and as to where it is, but it is, as far as we know, it's not in Netland at all, which is a big problem. There is, of course, the medium-term budget policy framework statement that is going to be announced in October. So it will mean that we're going to have to rush against time to find that information and to see whether we cannot use even the legislation to force the Treasury to present that into the Netland process. Now, on the issue of the public sector negotiations, you will be aware that the government initially asked for public sector workers to accept a 3%, and way below even the mid area of the target, which is 4.5%. Unions, all of them, Saftu, COSATU, FEDUSA, everybody said that's totally not acceptable. Currently, there is a process of facilitating that and to check if the parties cannot reach one another. We are watching that space very, very carefully, but it appears to us that like before, government is pushing ahead to want to solve the crisis of capitalism and the choice of its policies, such as neoliberalism, austerity program, budget cuts at the back of workers themselves. We're rejecting that. There's just no way that workers in the public sector are going to be forced to accept anything that is close to this 4.5% or even 4.7%, somewhere there. That's some of the proposals that they are now touting in that process. We're rejecting that. Our demand is 12%. Why 12%? Because they know, the negotiators of government, that workers' inflation is hovering somewhere at 10 to 11%, the real worker inflation. Forget about the 4.5% that the Reserve Bank governor is beating drums around. The inflation for the working class, on the basis of the fact that the food prices are running for how many years now at 15%. That's what you and me pay for food. And workers spend 60% of their income on transport and food prices. They're remaining with absolutely almost zero for electricity, for rates, for clothing, for leisure. Absolutely left with nothing, because after all, if you remember, the APSA study said that even the higher middle strata is spending 30% of their income to service debts. And that's why there was such a stampede, by the way, when government opened the opportunity for the two-pot system. Massive pandemonium, which indicates that workers are starving. They are the working poor whilst they are working. And so they're desperate for any kind of an income. And we can't agree to continuously subject workers to those conditions for another 30 years. That's our bottom line. And that's why we're making a call on the rest of the federations and on the rest of the working class that time is now to speak in one voice, to mobilize, and to ensure that we resist and we reverse some of these attacks that we are pointing out in the statement. We can't continuously live on like this. That's our bottom line. So the public sector workers, mobilize now for the strike, join our provincial shop steward councils, join our local shop steward councils that will be convening, and make sure that you see the struggle to resist these labor law amendments and their struggles to reverse your and to attack your living standards in the public sector as but just one struggle. That's the point that we're making. See the attacks by ESCOM, which seeks to increase the price of electricity next year by these astronomical figures, 36%, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which will amount to 45% if you include the 10% the municipalities add on that, which will therefore end up with a 45% increase. We don't have time for petitions like the DA. We have time to walk in the streets and to resist that assault on the working class. This is one struggle. Demand that the government do something about the fuel prices in South Africa. It must do something about the escalating and worsening crisis of the food prices in the country. It can't just say markets, the markets have spoken. That's nonsense. We want a government that is actively intervening and to stop these brutal attacks on the working class. Now,
if I can jump in there, I'm sorry. Are you going to be mobilizing and demonstrating on Budget Day?
Of course, we are going to Cape Town.
What do you make of this assertion that they maintain over time that they don't have the money, they can't afford to pay for the wages, going to a point of saying these wages are a threat to the fiscus? So do you reckon that there's money for these 12%? I just want to take on that. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Yes, we will be demonstrating in Cape Town on the 30th of October when they are announcing the medium-term budget policy framework statement. We have no doubt in our mind that that statement will constitute a further assault on the working class itself. And it will be about budget cuts. And in the statement, we're already pointing out what the budget cuts have meant to the workers. Already 2,400 teachers are going to be kissed goodbye in the Western Cape. 11,092 teachers are going to be shown the door in the KwaZulu-Natal. Here in Gauteng, you heard before that to avoid having to get rid of the educators, they are now taking the transport of the kids to school, the scholar transport system, as well as food that they provide to school kids. They have to reduce those budgets to maintain the teachers. There should be no choice between maintaining the levels of educators in the classroom and as to whether kids must not have or must have a right to eat or not eat, or to be transported to school or not to be transported to school. There's no such a cost. So we expect a full-blown attack on the working class. Look now, the minister, by the way, of Home Affairs is screaming like a small boy all over. He says that he has only 37% of the staff he needs in the Home Affairs department. He's screaming. But is that when the Treasury announces these assaults on the working class, these budget cuts and austerity program, it is they, the Democratic Alliance, that gives the Treasury the biggest round of applause. In fact, last year they used a term that says that the Treasury is reading from their playbook. The playbook is now being unleashed. He is now the minister with 37% only of the staff that he needs. He's crying. He shouldn't cry. He must lie on that bed. It is made by him demanding austerity and neoliberalism. That, again, it is the choice of this government. It is a policy choice, which is something they call fiscal consolidation, or they call that they want to have, what do you call this? They want to have a surpluses, budget surplus, and they want to cut the deficit to the GDP ratio below 73%. They have forgotten the history of South Africa, including the era in which the previous white-only government used to tolerate a GDP debt ratio of around 110%, which led to the creation of all of the state-owned enterprises that this government is now wanting to privatize. They saying that these are the policy choices, all inspired by their signature to the structural adjustment programs that are driven by these rating agencies, the IMF and the World Bank. It is a choice. They had other choices to pursue, but they have chosen neoliberalism, austerity program, which means budget cuts, and fiscal consolidation, which means privatization and more budget cuts. It's a policy choice. They are solving the crisis of capitalism on the backs of workers. We are resisting that. We are refusing that. We're saying that there are other choices that you should be pursuing instead of a disastrous choice. Look, the point that you were making, let me develop that further. The government is already having its back on the wall in that it is being deserted by the working class. The ANC is being deserted by the working class. It lost where it came down ages ago because it can't deliver to the expectations of working class for the better life for all. It lost Nelson Mandela ages ago because it cannot address the squalor conditions, the crisis of crime, because it doesn't have enough police in the streets all over the Nelson Mandela, and that people are unemployed. It's now lost Johannesburg, Tshwane, Ekurhuleni. It is almost on the verge of losing Durban, and it will eventually lose even the Buffalo City. But they are so enslaved to the current programs that they have chosen a path that says we rather die pleasing the rating agencies, IMF and the World Bank, or the New York tycoons, or the guys that have turned our economy into a casino here in Sandton. We will rather die and hope that our Democratic Alliance will save us. No, it's not going to save them. And unfortunately, the ANC is like I once said, that it's like they've been given some muti to make them blind, to lose their conscience, and to just continue to walk in this path of total disaster for itself and the levels of support that it should have. 2016, when is the local government election? 2026, it is still going to take the same pounding. Because the current economic programs are not going to reverse unemployment, poverty, inequality. They are not even able to address the levels of crime. South Africa is in a precipice. Look at what is happening in the Eastern Cape. Massacre after massacre, family feuds, the level of depression and mental health problems that are playing themselves out with families hiring assassins to kill one another, mothers committing suicide and killing their babies, and in order to avoid the crisis of poverty that ordinary people are experiencing. So we deal with a very, very hardened group of neoliberals led by the president, who refuse to look at any other alternative, but to keep on telling the country that we have no money, we have no money. No, they had money. They have rejected a call made by labor movement and the progressive forces in this country to introduce a wealth tax, a solidarity tax. They rejected that out of hand way back in 1993, 1994. Even Bishop Tutu died calling for the government to introduce a wealth tax. They rejected that. Instead of introducing a wealth tax, in lieu of the fact that we are the most unequal society with 1% of the population owing 45% of the wealth and 10% of the population owing 90% of the wealth, they introduced a raft of measures, such as reducing the corporate taxes from 52% at their highest point in 1993 to currently 27%. The very same people are saying we have no money, we have no money. Workers must accept below the inflation increases. Then they introduce a monetary policy to remove all exchange controls in the economy, to allow their firms in the private sector to go list elsewhere in the whole world, in New York, in London, and elsewhere. The same people who are allowing resources to leave the country are crying foul. We have no money, we have no money. In addition to that, they removed all exchange controls, and they are allowing these guys to move out of this economy between 300 to 400 billion rands every year, which is now estimated to be running to a 1.8 trillion rands. They're doing nothing about illicit cash outflows, but they turn around to the working class and say, we have no resources to pay you a living wage, to employ more people in the home affairs. Then they complain, we have a porous borders. We have a porous borders. They don't say that, no, but in the home affairs, we only have 37% of the people who should be employed. They see no relationship. And I was listening to these guys on Sunday. Oh, no, there are foreigners that are taking over our spaza shops. Who's the government? Who has been sleeping on the job? And going to your question, they are now jumping. And that's why we issued, please look at the statement we issued yesterday, condemning the Gauteng government. In fact, if we had resources, I will argue to the leadership of the Federation that we must sue the government for the death of those 6 babies in Naledi. And I'm sure if we had a number of pro-poor NGOs that have resources, we should be able to sue them. These guys have a number of bylaws that are very categorical, that you can't just sell to kids and to the population food that has not been properly processed, that has not gone through certain hygienic standards. They have the bylaws to do that. But when babies die in our schools, they are the first to jump. They see every opportunity. They take every opportunity to go and present themselves as this, we are shocked. We are shocked. How could you be shocked? Because the failure to employ enough health inspectors and to enforce your own bylaws lead to what we are seeing in Hammanskraal, where kids are in hospitals everywhere else in the country. Somebody who have money, please give us that money. We will sue them. And because their blood is dripping, their hands are dripping the bloods of those workers, of the kids in Naledi, in Hammanskraal, and elsewhere in the country.
Thank you very much, Nopal. That concludes the business of